Little trivia for y'all. Evergreen State College is located in Thurston County, which is one of the wettest counties in America. And so not only when it rains, it pours. It doesn't really pour here when it rains. It just continually rains. And that's kind of like the news that comes out of Evergreen. It just continually trickles out and trickles out and trickles out. So here I have an article from the current issue of the Cooper Point Journal, which I heard was put under a litigation hold notice by the Attorney General, or Attorneys General, depending on how many attorneys or attorney there were involved in this litigation hold. But the litigation hold was specifically aimed at this article, which is an article based on a legal claim by the since resigned Chief of Police Stacy Brown, who you might remember from the protests and stuff that happened afterwards.
The question that somebody asked was why we responded to Brett. We would respond to anybody. It doesn't matter. I think it definitely operates different than it would if it was under an independent, police department. I think some decisions would be different based on law enforcement versus higher ed.
Yeah. I think this article is a great demonstration of how identity politics is both used and abused by those who believe in it, but we'll just go through it and see what we find. Former Evergreen Chief of Police formally alleges hostile work environment. Stacy Brown makes moves towards a legal claim of discrimination based on gender and race by the Cooper Point Journal staff, who basically is one person, Georgie Hicks. On February 5, legal representation for Stacy Brown, former chief of police for the Evergreen State College, sent a letter addressed to Aileen B. Miller, Assistant Attorney General and representative of the Evergreen State College, alleging that Stacy Brown resigned from the Evergreen State College because the college was a hostile work environment. In the letter, Brown's attorney, Christopher John Coker, alleges there was not only a pervasive hostility toward law enforcement in general at the college, but also towards her specifically, and that some of that hostility was based on her gender and, at times, her race. I don't know if the Cooper Point Journal took these commas like one by one precisely from where this letter put them, but they're all in the wrong place. It makes it really difficult to read. It goes on to say, quote, Brown was subjected to discriminatory actions and comments from college employees and college administration, as well as attacks on her character and gender by the student body that were either ignored, supported, or implicitly condoned by the college administration, and that the college failed to reasonably respond to a flyer being posted around campus depicting Ms. Brown in a racially and sexually explicit manner. Much of the letter describes hostility particular to Evergreen's ideological atmosphere surrounding law enforcement, but the allegations focus on the protected classes of gender and race to make its argument. The letter finally alleges that the hostile environment left her with no choice but to resign from the college. So what are they actually saying here? Maybe they'll go on to define it, but what are they actually saying? That much of the letter describes hostility particular to Evergreen's ideological atmosphere surrounding law enforcement, which is pretty damn hostile. But the allegations focus in on the protected classes of gender and race to make its argument. Are those two things mutually exclusive? And are they saying that you cannot criticize people because they think that these people of certain genders and races are protected? Is that what they're saying? That you cannot complain about certain genders and races? I don't know, but that's what I get from it so far. To continue, presumption of Brown's success as a chief of police is paramount to the litigation, as it says, quote, and the quote is wrong. It's an end quote to begin this thing. After riding through the ranks in Lewis County as a deputy, detective sergeant, and finally deputy chief, Chief Brown believed the position with TESC was an opportunity to gain experience as a chief and advance her career. Her career goal was to work as the chief of the Evergreen State College with the hope of someday advancing to a chief position in a larger department, correctly utilized, end quote. The letter later says, when she accepted the position with the Evergreen State College, Chief Brown's career was advancing and she seemed to be well on her way to bigger and better things. Near the end, under the header Aftermaths and Damages, the letter goes into details of the alleged losses it proposes. While Chief Brown enjoys her current work environment with the city of Tumwater, after 27 years in law enforcement, Chief Brown is faced with the reality of being required to essentially start back from the beginning in terms of career progression. With the city of Tumwater, Chief Brown is the patrol officer with least seniority. By accepting the city of Tumwater position, Chief Brown was forced to take a pay cut in excess of $15,000 per year. The damage to Chief Brown's reputation as a potential chief of police is damaged beyond repair. The litigation alleges that 2 emails, including a picture of bacon sent from a student employee and one from a faculty member stating that the police were basically fascists and the events that occurred at Chief Brown's swearing in were to be expected, cue footage,
several students, I think there's probably 20 or 30 students there, decided that they were going to get up in front and take over the entire event with noisemakers and drums and horns and the PA. And they actually went and took one of the microphones out of, I believe it was a vice president's hand, just jerked it out of her hand. And they basically, they were cursing, saying all kinds of things. It just went on and on. There was complete chaos. It got to the point where after about 15 minutes where President Bridges decided that the ceremony wasn't going to happen. I personally watched some of these students go up to Chief Brown's right up to her face and call her, all kinds of names, cursing at her, as well as she had her young children with her who were fearful of what's going on.
The Cooper Point Journal can confirm that in spite of the degendering language of the litigation, the student employee in question is not male, and in fact her state ID is labeled female. I guess they should throw this legal claim out for degendering and misgendering people. Maybe that's a crime?
As a footnote, the student who sent Stacy Brown a picture of bacon in response to the different ways that she was attempting to make amends between the police force and the community was also involved in the assault in early June that we have footage of that I've showed repeatedly, as well as Lawrence. And for that assault, they are being sued not only by the people who were assaulted, but also, I've heard, by the state. And Guinness and Lawrence are both raising funds through Funder, one of those crowd sites. And I just want to read this first paragraph here. Lawrence and Guinness are known on campus to speak out against white supremacy, ableism, and trans misogyny. As trans and multiply marginalized students, they were targeted and decided to leave the Evergreen State College after the culmination of alt-right threat and escalation on the campus. Among events that made national news, interactions with students and staff made the campus unsafe for Guinness and Lawrence to attend. In aftermath of these events, Lawrence and Guinness are being charged by another student. So far, they've raised about $900.
Another allegation revolves around a flyer that was present during part of the protests last year, with an illustration the litigation says depicts Brown, quote, wearing suggestive clothing, a KKK-type hood, and holding a gooey duck that appears to be ejaculating, as the letter to Miller explains. The letter also contains allegations regarding the Flaming Eggplant restaurant and the Cooper Point Journal, CPJ, to which Brown alleges that anti-police sentiment and clearly untrue, discriminatory and derogatory statements about her were allowed to be posted and published by Tom Mercado, former director of student activities, specifically because she was a female police chief. Hold on just a second. To quote from the Cooper Point Journal, one of the articles reads towards the end, "In their choice of Stacy Brown for campus police chief, Evergreen has given power to another white person that has no understanding of racial issues. Brown, and by extension the school, seems to think the white perspective is the only one worth considering, a perspective that this administration is already full of. You yourself can be a good cop all you want, but you still uphold an unjust system. Complacency and participation are support. The day when black and brown, well, capital B black and not capital B brown people are no longer profiled, brutalized, murdered, and enslaved in the prison system because of the color of their skin by your brothers and sisters in the force is the day I will maybe consider feeling sorry about your hurt feelings over all cops are bastards, signs, and chants. You may be hated for the uniform you choose to put on, but I was born in my skin." Which begs the question, Georgie Hicks, are you born in this attitude that you have or not? And from the article, "Police Are Not Our Friends," well, I'll just read the end here, because again, it's by Georgie Hicks. "Liberal discourse resists any argument that indicts all police officers, even as it disingenuously claims to understand our problems with the policing system. Quisenberry's letter says we cannot see Brown as simply a symbol of police oppression. That dehumanizes her and makes assumptions about her based on stereotypes of police officers. What this means is Quisenberry refuses to see her as a symbol of police oppression, most likely because they are not oppressed by the police. I do and can and will see all police who have chosen to join a violent force that upholds slavery to this day as a symbol of oppression. So I will basically dehumanize people as I see fit. Saying, quote unquote, let's just treat everyone nicely does not work, exclamation. We have been asking nicely. I don't know her definition of nicely, but she is I'm waiting for the day, Georgie Hicks, that you do an article about me. I'm waiting for it. Bring it on. I want to see if you brush up your grammar just for me. Saying, let's just treat everyone nicely does not work. We have been asking nicely for much longer than either of us have been alive, and we are still victims of violence and unjust treatment every day. The victimized in this country should not be made to jump twice as high to make the police our friends, when the police were never meant to be our friends in the first place. The police will never be my friend, and if you bust out of your white liberal fantasy they help you uphold, you'd see they shouldn't be yours either. Those are just two little snippets from Georgie Hicks' writing on the Evergreen Police. And there's a whole slew of articles that are still online, and if they're not on the Cooper Point Journal website, then they'll be over at archive.io. To continue with the original article, the anti-police sentiment allegedly includes employees from the Flaming Eggplant oinking at the police, and the CPJ publishing several opinion pieces regarding Brown's interview with the paper and issues of policing in general. The Cooper Point Journal published several articles regarding policing during Brown's tenure, but the only article mentioned in the letter was a student of color who was also the only student journalist mentioned by name. Oh, and you're not supposed to criticize students of color. This is what I think they're trying to say, is that their conception of what a protected class is not just, you can't disregard people based on gender, race, etc., but there's certain races, genders, etc., that you are not allowed to criticize whatsoever or call out. They have a free pass.
I don't think I'm smarter than anybody else, but it seems to me that one thing we haven't talked about much is the protected classes, the ones that are afforded some of the protections that we talked about tonight. And the protected classes are based on data, historical history. It's not just a group of people, a bunch of folks who just come up and say, well, we were offended by this, so we want the government to shut this down, and if we talk to the right college president or whatever, they go, you're right, we're going to shut it down. We're talking about people, at least when the First Amendment is concerned. Well, in the case we're talking about tonight, it's protected classes, and they're protected for a reason. It's not a privilege, it's protection.
But it's untenable in this society. That's not something that's going to work, at least not legally. We'll see. The allegations against Mr. Mercado, which is not to be confused with Mercato Restaurante in downtown Olympia, you should go there if you're passing through. Quote, when Chief Brown advised Mr. Mercado of her concerns about the restaurant employees' actions and the posting of discriminatory and hostile flyers about her and the police around the student activities building, Mr. Mercado appeared to become angry and defiantly informed Chief Brown it was freedom of speech. Another allegation regards a female faculty member of color who scheduled a meeting to discuss her claim that an officer was racist. The faculty member pointed out a racialized power dynamic exhibited when Ms. Brown showed up to the meeting in uniform and carrying a firearm, as the letter states, quote, when Chief Brown arrived at Ms. Harris's office for the pre-scheduled meeting, she was immediately confronted by Ms. Harris and told by Ms. Harris that she could not believe Chief Brown, a white woman, would show up at her office carrying a firearm.
No one chose to be socialized into racism, so no one is quote-unquote bad, but no one is neutral. To not act against racism is to support racism. Racism must be continually identified, analyzed, and challenged. No one is ever done. The question is not, did racism take place, but rather, how did racism manifest in that situation? The racial status quo is comfortable for most whites. Therefore, anything that maintains white comfort is suspect. The racially oppressed have a more intimate insight via experiential knowledge of the system of race than their racial oppressors. However, white professors will be seen as having more legitimacy. Thus, positionality must be intentionally engaged.
According to the document, the faculty member informed Brown that she believed Chief Brown was wearing her uniform and firearm to intentionally prove she had more privilege than her and was trying to intimidate her. In regards to this incident, the letter states, Chief Brown was very concerned about Ms. Harris's seemingly derogatory comments about her race and gender and wanted to bring it to the attention of Ms. Indris because she was worried about being labeled in such a manner, end quote. And goes on to say that after being informed, Ms. Indris did not investigate and possibly discipline Ms. Harris for the interaction. Numerous other allegations are present within the litigation, including that President Bridges stated, I bet you are looking for a new job. This has been a very hostile work environment for you. The Cooper Point Journal will continue to cover the story as the possible lawsuit unfolds. And very cleverly, the Cooper Point Journal has positioned an article right after this article that reads, Olympia mother dead after being chemically restrained at cop's request. So, there you go. Stacy Brown is filing a lawsuit against the Evergreen State College, and we'll see how that develops. Stay tuned. I am working very hard on an epic episode of Expose Evergreen that has to do with a certain president's State of the College address, which will be out this weekend. Have a good night.